You're listening to Two Beers Until Phronesis, a philosophy podcast for students, graduates, and anyone else interested in ideas. Alongside regular guests and friends, we discuss some of life's big questions over a few beers. Enjoy. So Joe, I understand you recently did an essay on Raymond Gaita and his ethical views and how that relates to genetic engineering.
I did. So Gaita.
so who is Raymond Gaita?
I believe he's an Australian philosopher.
Because he's not that well known, is he?
No, he's not. He's quite contemporary, fairly modern.
Is he still alive?
I believe so.
Joe reads philosophers that you've never heard of.
Yeah, cool. You wouldn't know him.
You wouldn't. You're not cool enough, man.
I knew Gaita before he was cool.
he's a bit. Yeah, this is a bit of a hipster reference compared to someone like that.
He's an indie philosopher.
Yeah. His view of ethics. What exactly is it, and where is it?
So the first thing that Gaita does is separate morality from ethics.
Mm-hmm.
So to give that an illustration, morality for him would be a wider spectrum. So take utilitarianism. It gives us the philosophic calculus, which is a thing that we can apply to everything. Supposedly, he calls that morality. That is a sense of understanding about universalization, so it can apply to deontology as well. So any universal theory that applies to everyone and is kind of macro as opposed to micro.
Yeah, so it's
morality.
Kind of like prescriptions of actions, the do's and don'ts, the taboos, and the kind of the actions we affirm in a societal kind of space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so ethics is different. How?
So ethics for him is, as we've talked about Levinas before, it's more phenomenological. It's more personal, and it's these individual encounters with each other. That is ethics. So how we see each other, how we interact with each other, regardless of any theory that we apply to that, it is the immediate reaction we have between each other, which is ethics.
So to get a full understanding of what Levinas says, you'd probably be best to look at the podcast we just did on it. But do you think that Gaita kind of deviates from Levinas in any sense, or do you think they're pretty much the same?
Well, Gaita doesn't talk about the face. So if you've listened to the Levinas podcast, you know he focuses on the face, and it's all about that part of the human. With Gaita, it's less specific. He also avoids any religious talk at all. Obviously, we've talked about Levinas not being religious, but he does use religious connotations. He uses the talk of God. Yeah. Right. Gaita is not. Gaita is purely secular. So that is where he differs. And also the separation of morality and ethics. I don't think Levinas ever necessarily states that. He implies it definitely.
Yeah, I was going to say it's implicit because, again, existentialism and continental philosophy is this move away from traditional morality and conventional religion, conventional narratives. So Gaita definitely fits within that, you think?
Definitely.
Okay, so was there a particular book or a particular thing you looked at with Gaita?
I can't remember.
Because I just read his where the thing that apparently conceptualizes his philosophy the most, which is it's the story of when he worked in a psychiatric hospital.
Yep.
Have you guys read that one?
I've touched upon it. I haven't read the whole thing, but I have read basically the bit you've talked about.
Yeah, it's called A Common Humanity, thinking about love and truth and justice.
Yes.
So in this, he basically describes his experience working in a psychiatric ward, and he talks about the way that people conceptualize their treatment of psychiatric patients,
right,
and how that can be quite brutal, and how the language doesn't really match up with the actions. Because I think he's one of these people. I mean, to put it in a very colloquial way of kind of communicating his ethics, you could kind of say actions speak louder than words. That's maybe one way of looking at it, but I think there is also some epistemic stuff going on. There's some ontological stuff going on, and that I found quite difficult reading this. I mean, you haven't really read it, but he describes that a nun visits the hospital, and somehow her actions are better than anyone else. Her way of conceptualizing love is better because it's love without being condescending.
Right.
And I don't know. It gets a little bit more complicated because then he starts comparing goodness to courage, saying that courage is different from goodness because courage can't say if you're courageous on behalf of a particular ideal, the ideal can still be false. But with goodness, if you're good on behalf of something, the goodness reveals the thing that justifies it to be true. And that claim I find particularly difficult.
So the way I've been interpreting this is like I've sort of said earlier, and I've actually mentioned this before in the mindfulness podcast, so you might be able to, I'm pretty sure that made the edit, but it's to do with this idea of, I call it behavioural truth. I think some people call it, or metaphorical truth. So it's this idea that you can have a behaviour that turns out to be, have a more truthful output or result, in terms of what actually happens, but the belief that reinforced the behaviour might be false in and of itself. And I think the example I give was in sports. So you have a guy who's baseball bat guy or whatever, and he believes that he's like he prays or something, or prays to the baseball god before he goes on, and that actually gives him loads of confidence. But even though maybe the baseball god doesn't exist, that confidence that might have actually made him a better player. So it actually produced a better behavioural output, despite the actual truth of the situation not being necessarily one-to-one. Because there's a difference between the way in which someone is inspired to behave, the truth which inhabits them that will inspire them to behave in that sense. And so that's the way in which I was sort of interpreting that as that kind of behavioural truth, and sort of separating this idea of like, well, I believe that such a thing is true, but that produces a truthful output, and the output of the truth is what matters. And in this sense, he's saying, well, good. If the output is good, then that justifies. I mean, he's actually saying that it actually justifies and creates.
I agree with you. Having read the Gaita, I agree with you kind of 90%, because Gaita kind of wants to say that it's not the intention of the action of love that is good, and it's also unlike what you're saying, it's not actually the outcome that matters.
Right, so it's actually not the
the outcome doesn't justify it. It's not
deontology, and it's not consequentialism.
Yeah, okay. It's weird. So do you want to pick that up? Because
I mean, pretty much what Nigel said is how I'd interpret it initially, but to not the full extent.
Right.
So it is some kind of middle ground between the two.
Yeah, I think it's just he wants to think of it as like a wholly different way of...
Right, it's a whole new thing for him.
Yeah. Is it probably more in line with something like virtue?
Yeah, is it more
quite probably, yeah.
So it's the action of being ethical that's important, not the outcome and not the intention. So when I say the action, virtue ethics is obviously focusing on the character and the virtues a character has, but this is more just, I don't know, the expression of love.
Like the love or the good output is the virtue, perhaps, if we're talking about,
The way Gaita would describe it is a recognition of someone else as another human. You can, combine love and compassion, all that kind of thing in that. But the simple thing for Gaita is that ethics is simply recognising someone else as a human being. That is all ethics is for him. Simple as that.
Very like Levinas,
isn't it?
Yeah, very Levinas.
But they've never.
They don't cite each other. Well, obviously Levinas doesn't cite Gaita, but
apparently Gaita's never read Levinas.
No,
he doesn't read because it might make him too powerful.
Who knows?
No, apparently he's not ever referenced him as a source.
No, he hasn't referenced him. So, he may have read him, but he hasn't referenced him directly, certainly.
Right, so, and is Gaita a phenomenologist? Is he in that sort of line?
I'd say so.
Okay, right.
I'd say he's definitely an existentialist. He's definitely continental. I was with the phenomenology stuff. I was a bit confused as to where he sort of sits epistemically in terms of what he thinks knowledge is. I think he wants to say, regardless of religious truth, because he does talk about religious truth as kind of being separate to ethical truth.
Okay.
Which is a bit confusing, but I think that he wants to say that at least ethical truth is this idea of conceptualizing the other, to use a kind of Lebanese term, as being dignified, as being a full human. Because he also kind of wants to say that just conceptualizing someone as a human isn't quite enough. that the action of doing that, of treating them like a human, makes them into a human. That it's sort of contingent to that, like the way of expressing love.
You mentioned dignity
Yeah.
in that. How would you understand how dignity comes into play? Because you said that you recognise them as a human, as dignified, as someone that should be dignified, or at least viewed as a dignified person. Where does someone go from an object to a person? What is it?
So I think we're probably using a few too many Leibnizian ideas, even though obviously their ideas are quite similar. But he's talking in within this anecdote of working in a psychiatric hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So when he's talking about dignity, I can only imagine he's talking about the idea that a lot of these people are incontinent.
Mm-hmm.
To take one example, which is one he mentions, and they would hose them down at sort of a mop's length, like an elephant at a zoo. He uses that example, and he says that most people also treated them like elephants at zoos. They treated them like objects. They were quite brutal in their language and their actions. Then he says, okay, so there are some other people that weren't, but they were seen as kind of naive fools who would take their time washing them by hand and everything. And he was wondering about, well, what is it that makes that person be like that? What is their drive? And these are the people that use the language of dignity. But he wants to say that the action didn't reveal their dignity. If anything, it just revealed a kind of virtue signalling hypocrisy of, okay, sure. So they're washing their feet and everything, going, "You had a good day, Gareth," like wiping their ass. But in fact, they're actually being quite condescending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then he uses the example of the nun that came there, and it was the nun's actions that revealed dignity, because she wasn't condescending. She saw them as worthy subjects of this kind of this really powerful sense of love that wasn't contingent. That it wasn't. I didn't rely upon anything. Sorry. So I don't know. He kind of wants to say that in doing this, the nun revealed their dignity.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing because I'm not entirely sure how he's parameterizing dignity into.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult idea to unpack.
He's using dignity to describe treating a human as a human, I think.
Yeah, I think he's not. I don't think he's concerned with the nuances of what dignity entails.
No.
I think he's using it as a rhetorical flourish to just kind of conceptualize this idea. He wants to use dignity as a way of negating condescension.
Yeah.
He wants to use it as unqualified love. He wants it as
Right. He's trying
love
to
that is
avoid
unconditional.
So he's trying to avoid someone coming into psychiatric ward he was working in, washing down one of the patients and saying, "Hey, I've done my job. Fuck it, I've washed them down. That's my job done." He's differentiating between that and someone who truly sees a vulnerable person in front of them and is going to care for them.
Yeah.
So he's separating the action a little bit.
Right. So am I right in saying he's sort of the way he's following on from Levinas is Levinas would be more about the conception of someone as an individual, where he's sort of taking it to the step of also the behaviour has to reflect.
He's adding
the
that extra
individuals.
step.
Yeah. Okay. So so the individual not only has to conceive of this individual as a human, but it's also this extra. You have to conceive it with dignity and behave in such a way that. I mean, is that sort of where he's developing this, or?
I believe so. I think he's more of a practical kind of ethicist. Like some of the papers I've seen that he's done, it's more like trying to bring these semi-Lebanesian stuff to real day examples. So speaking
I think you made a good point. That is what he's after. He is practical.
So
when you read his stuff.
Speaking of real everyday examples, how did you use Gaita to bring this to genetic engineering, which is like one of the big topical ethical things?
So what I talked about was for ethics, according to Gaita, it is treating a human as a human.
Mm-hmm.
Genetic engineering doesn't do that. So at the moment, what most of science is focusing on in terms of genetics is something called CRISPR. CRISPR, which is basically gene editing. So taking out certain parts that are bad, putting in other things that are good. And in doing that, we're...
Could you unpack that a little bit? Like, so when we say good things, bad things...
Okay.
Illnesses versus, like, appearance. What kind of...
Okay, so there's a guy called Julian Savulescu who approaches from a utilitarian point of view. And basically what he says is that it is our moral obligation to genetically modify people for the best. Yeah. He gives an example. He says there's embryo A and embryo B. Embryo A is subject to asthma. Embryo B is not. He says there is nothing better about embryo A than embryo B. And this is in a situation where someone's going to choose an embryo. So he says every time you choose embryo B because it doesn't have the predisposition to develop asthma, whereas embryo A does. So you destroy embryo A because it is objectively worse than embryo B.
Mm.
So, but how does he like tie that with like an obligation or like a moral obligation?
Because basically what he's saying is that we should want the best for children, for the future, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I would say there's probably the two primary objections I would imagine most people would have to this position. I suppose one,
it's horribly subjective.
Right, yeah. So yeah, the first one, the problem is the slippery slope argument, which would be at what point does this become eugenics? At what point does this
absolutely
slip into, well, actually, I don't want my boy to have green eyes, I want him to have blue eyes, etc., etc., etc. The second one is actually our understanding of the genome is nowhere near the genome is unbelievably complicated. I mean, actually, funnily enough, in terms of information, it's not actually something like 50 terabytes or something quite conceivable in terms of the actual raw amount of information. But obviously, what it's coding for and the way in which genes code is quite non-linear. Like genes don't necessarily, one-to-one interact with one particular thing. You don't have an allele will not be specifying, it might be like, well, this is sort of blue, but you can have like multiple alleles and, some can be recessive, some cannot be, and you can have multiple ways in which those alleles express themselves. And you can even have genes that like shut down certain other alleles and are literally there to shut down other genes. And you can also have epigenetic genes which shut down at different points in your life. So you can have like, for instance, psychosomatic dwarfism, which is the guy who wrote Peter Pan, who I can't remember his name now, Barnum or something Barnum. I can't remember his name, or something Barry.
Barry.
Something Barry.
James Barry.
Yeah, so I mean, he's an example of psychosomatic dwarfism, which is where you actually have an effect on one of your growth genes, which stops your brain from producing ghrelin, which is a growth hormone. So you can actually end up with, in extreme stressful situations, children who are under an enormous amount of duress during younger age will actually shut down their genes for growing. So it's like, so this is all just like painting the picture of, the genome and genes and genetic engineering is immensely complicated in terms of like the one-to-one output of editing with something like CRISPR and I suppose that's the second objection would be like, well, at what point do we really understand exactly where we're doing what we're editing?
Right,
and it's innocent enough to say, well, okay, well, this genome here, this, could have Huntington's, for example, or a severe genetic
well, you say it's innocent enough, but I kind of want to bring in a third point that isn't slippery slope, which is ethical, which is that, say if you're someone who has asthma yourself, but if you eliminate everybody with asthma, every potential person with asthma, what does that say about the extant people with asthma? Which is
this is a point that Peter Singer makes,
right,
as you can imagine.
Didn't Julian Savulescu study under Peter Singer?
He did, yeah. He wrote his thesis regarding moral obligation for genetic engineering under the supervision of Peter Singer, which is strange because
Peter Singer's like one of the foremost people on ethics. Yeah,
it is weird. What Peter Singer says, particularly he talks about dwarfism. He says, okay, so people are making steps towards genetically engineering people without diseases, right? So we're trying to eradicate dwarfism. Let's just say there is a case where we're trying to eradicate dwarfism because technically it is it's an issue for people. It's something they have to overcome, something they have to struggle with.
Is it classed as a disability?
It is a disability. So something that perhaps in the future maybe we'd try and eradicate. So you're a dwarf living among a community of other little people, which there are people who have like created their own fucking societies and everything around it. How the hell do you feel when someone says we're trying to eradicate people like you? We're trying to stop people like you being born.
Your life isn't worth living.
Don't be wrong.
No,
you
I
are
think-
suffering from a disability, and you
think-
understand that.
Yeah, I
but-
think some people would see it as a disability. I think many people suffering with dwarfism might say, well, shit, yeah, I've got perhaps a lower life expectancy. I've got health issues, and I can't reach high shelves. There's lots of different problems.
No, I can't do that.
Yeah,
Looking
in
at
that order of importance as well.
Yeah.
Shit's hard to reach.
But I think others would say, well, actually, it's given me a unique perspective on life. I don't see it as a disability.
So
it
the other thing
informs
that-
who I am.
The other thing that Singer talks about is cochlear implants. So the hearing aid style thing that basically enables deaf people to hear under certain circumstances. He opens one of his essays by saying that cochlear implants are genocide.
Right.
And he does a really good job of justifying that.
I think that's a rhetorical flourish.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. He's just trying to be.
And I
wants to
would
Exactly.
say I'm willing to bet if you polled everyone with dwarfism in this country, for example, if you could feasibly do something like that, I reckon most of them would say, given the choice of being born without dwarfism, they would have preferred. Maybe I'm wrong here. I would say most of them would have categorised it as a disadvantage, or in some sense would have wanted differently. But I think most of the psychological coping mechanisms they have to employ are based around the acceptance of it, and I have a unique perspective and etc. But
They have to watch a
but
lot of
I would. I
Lord of the
think exactly yeah. And I think they would also probably not necessarily want to wish it on other people or their children.
There's a really good episode of House. I don't know if you guys watch House, but there's this woman with dwarfism, and then her daughter has dwarfism, or so they think, and then it turns out that they can literally choose whether she has dwarfism or not. And there's this really interesting discussion because, it's one thing to kind of say, you're no more worse than anyone else. Where you say to your daughter, look, you're fine as you are. If you're going to be if dwarfism is unavoidable for you, that's fine. But then when you presented with the choice, I think it almost becomes a very different scenario. He says cochlear implants are genocide.
Right. So his justification for that is that an implant is allowing a deaf person to be part of, in air quotations, normal society. And if that is the case, then the society that has been created around deaf people with their own language, all this community that's built up,
Deaf culture
is going to be eradicated. Which he's right. It has the potential to do that.
Just to play devil's advocate, let's say there's a culture surrounding cancer research that gets destroyed
when they cure
cancer. A discipline, really. You're destroying a whole branch of medicine in a day.
I guess that is an argument. At the same time, it's is this an ends justify the means? I mean, like to a certain extent, it's like
I don't buy that for a second.
Right?
It's
Certain
not really my-
cultures die all the time as well.
You're talking about the difference between a life-destroying disease to
Right.
deafness.
So you draw the line at life destroying, and then anything less than life
I'm
destroying.
not sure I'm drawing a line. I'm just kind of.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I do totally agree with you when it comes to. I wouldn't just draw the line at aesthetics. I would draw the line to a lot of, personally, to a lot of things that are seen as disabilities as well.
Right.
If we could eradicate them, it kind of goes back to the discussion we had on transhumanism. Like, I think it's this just sanitized, far too idealized version of the human, and I think it's just kind of weird, like puritanical, evangelical idea of a.
What I would say in some sense, I mean, as is the tradition with culture, it's like parts of it die off and subcultures die off and different things change and culture changes in general as the society adjusts and changes to different development. Can't say, well, yeah, there's some degree of inherent cultural value to everything or to different cultures. But at the same time, it's like how much do we let the sort of naturalistic sense of cultural development and the death of certain subcultures, whatever, naturally occur in order for development of an overarching culture to continue. I used the word culture about 7,000 times there.
So,
Yeah.
as a recap, Gaita,
Yes.
his work concerns ethical treatment of humans,
Yes.
and then
Seeing a human as a human.
Assuming with dignity and all that malarkey, and then transporting that to genetic engineering. That's all about the definition of what is a human.
Right.
So what's the link between Gaita and... I'm sure he probably hasn't done any work on it.
He hasn't, no.
So what is your interpretation of his interpretation, if you like?
So, having talked about genetic engineering, what it clearly does is sees humans as a group of genes to edit and control and change a series of problems. Like, no offence, like asthma is a problem for certain humans that they're going to take out, supposedly. And then we start the slippery slope of putting intelligence in, putting good memory and things like that, which is something I have discussed, and I suppose we'll go on to in a minute.
That really is problematic, yeah.
But what it is seeing humans as these series of problems and genes, not as a human. It totally misses the point of seeing a human as a human.
So it's kind of a combination of reductionism and it's sort of premising from a foundational point of view of looking at the other, the idea of the human, from a kind of negative premise from the word go.
Yeah.
It's saying, okay, what are the problems to solve here? Yeah.
So another book of Gaita's that we haven't talked about yet is, I believe it's called Common Humanity. So a common humanity is basically talking about all of us have a common sense of humanity because we're all fucking human. Like, at the very basics, that's all it is.
The book I was just quoting is A Common Humanity.
Yeah. Oh, so the other one is Good and Evil and Absolute Conception, sorry.
Ah, right.
So A Good and Evil and Absolute Conception is his PhD. And then his work after that is A Common Humanity.
Yeah.
What he talks about that is that we all have this common sense of being human. And in that, treating each other as human. So we all have that relatability to each other that we should be looking for. And that is the recognition of each other as human, which is his ethics.
Would you say that something like gene therapy isn't possible if you adopt Gaita's view? Would you say it's
or at least
possible?
it's dehumanizing?
Yeah,
yes, is
right.
what he's arguing, right?
It's-
So gene therapy would be.
It's unethical, according to Gaita, because ethics is recognising a human as a human, and genetic engineering simply doesn't do that.
Yeah. So do you think that Gaita would say that we should stop doing it?
I think so.
Yeah. Completely?
I think so.
Do you think there's a way we can conceptualize the human subject and do gene therapy?
If we're seeing humans as problems, that's what the kind of... From a fundamental level, you've got humans as a series of problems that need to be solved.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be treating someone with dignity to solve these problems for them? So you can see that someone's suffering. If someone's possibly going to have eczema, and you see that you recognise them
Change
as...
from asthma to eczema.
Yeah.
Is it asthma or eczema? Asthma.
We'll do X, man.
We'll do eczema.
Change it
See someone's going to have eczema. Eczema's bad, man. That hurts, I've heard. You wouldn't it be treating them as a human to recognise that they would want not to have it?
You'd have to employ empathy, wouldn't you, to be able to go, well,
to be able
this
to...
person is suffering
So
from...
how is that not ethical?
So in A Common Humanity, he talks about everybody is an individual. And individualism is really important for Gaita because we're all individual, we're all unique. We must respect that. And I don't think we're respecting an individual and as unique if we're talking about genetic engineering.
So yeah, we kind of have to employ the use of consent when we're doing this, but and then really take that on board with how we fundamentally go about genetic engineering. So looking at why people want to do this and the idea of the self that they have.
I probably do have a different opinion on this as far as like the modification goes. The first, and I think we've talked about this before, particularly in the context of transhumanism.
Yeah, we have.
Which is to clarify, transhumanism is this idea, human beings are sort of problem, again, the problem
Cyborgs.
Mortality is
yeah.
like...
and people like Kurzweil, whatever, upload your consciousness into machine, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
And in that same context, you end up having the same discussion about, okay, at what point is, a human, at what point are we modifying, unethically, someone past the point of humour, and you can study well. I think particularly in the context of gene therapy, this is also a problem because genes are not, like I said earlier, you can also have epigenetic effects on genes. It's like, is gene therapy how you can give someone a child gene therapy by, like I said, causing them an extremely stressful situation. You are changing the way their genes operate. And working not only that, but it's like if a small baby needs to have an iron heart or whatever, or an iron lung or something to survive for a while,
So
it can't make the choice.
The lines are arbitrary.
Yeah, of course. Like it's at what point are we just going to say, well, it's wrong for us to make a choice about giving a small child life support, etc. And while I agree, like I said, with the arguments with how genetic engineering can definitely go awry and be a problem. Equally, it's like it is very difficult, and like we're having a discussion about where this grey line is exactly at what point are we invoking problems, at what point are we dehumanizing, but also at what point are we also, I don't want to use the word like Luddite or anything, try to be too, at what point are we maybe over worrying about a particular technology, which by the way is fairly a lot of these gene techniques are very recent, and not only that, but like especially with gene sequencing, which is the last 5 to 10 years has gone from being a thing that you can only do in like a specific laboratory and is extremely expensive to you can now sequence your genes at home with the right kit. It's amazing how quickly this technology is developing. And in China, they are already starting to mess around with genes.
Yeah, I was going to mention, just to like give some updated news on that, it has happened.
Yeah.
So a Chinese surgeon, genetic engineer, he has. Yeah, so the twins were born with the predisposition to not be able to get HIV. So they're immune to HIV because of CRISPR, basically.
Your problem with my objection to transhumanism is that it's kind of this question of where do you draw the line?
And I'm not a transhumanist, I should say, but my arguments against it are different in the sense that I don't necessarily worry too much about this idea of seeing the faults of people as being, an inherent part or a part of an identity, or like, should or shouldn't be fixed for whatever ethical reason. I have slightly different opinions.
I think where I draw the line is where you begin to conceptualize people as faults. So you start to premise how you see humanity as a wider whole. By virtue of these problems.
I totally agree. From a psychological perspective, the way this can affect you, and I totally agree. That can lead to dehumanization,
and that's my rejection with Christianity and a lot of other Abrahamic religions and other religions beyond that. I think that's what largely where my criticism extends to that. It's this premise of setting out to sort of critique a fundamental part, something intrinsic.
So like original sin in Christianity, which is like the inherent wrong.
Yeah. I think sure there's a way to do genetic engineering. There's a way to kind of take on transhumanist ideas whilst still affirming some sense. And it is literally just the distinction of that psychological element of so are you doing this to affirm or are you doing it to? So it's the attitude you bring to the practice, I think. I think that
I don't think anyone would disagree that whatever happens, we need to approach this with immense caution. Like this genetic engineering thing is one a massily growing, very new technology where we're being able to do it in increasingly cheaper and more viable ways, but also like we don't like I said, it's a complicated enough thing that its impacts on our ethics and society and the way we're going to go forward is going to be incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think so when you're talking about changing appearances and everything, I'm immediately reminded of something like the narcissism involved in like selfies and social media and things. This very sort of hyper narcissistic way that we've come to see ourselves, and kind of extends into gene therapy and stuff, and like the plastic surgery, all kinds of things like that, and then the eugenics starts to make that look a lot scarier very quickly.
Right. So I talked about this guy Savalescu, who talked about it being our moral obligation to want the best for our children, and therefore genetically engineer them, and he talks about character traits, and bearing in mind he defines his own version of character traits. But when he talks about these, he's talking about intelligence, talking about memory, strength. And he's saying that surely we want to choose all these best things for our children. So we want them to be the most intelligent, we want them to be the most strong, have the best memory, because it means they'll do better in exams, things like that. But which is fucking frightening to me.
Right. Yeah, because it's like obviously those arguments laid out like that. You're like, oh well, there's no doubt, but obviously there's all these downsides, not necessarily just because of the fact that it can lead to all that down the slippery slope, but also because of the unknowability of it, and also
I would say straight up that I think flaws are important, I think that have this the race of superhumans is like right away, and it's kind of and then from that psychological point, it's like, why do you want a race of superhumans? Are you kind of saying we're not enough? Do you hate us? Do you hate what you are that much to want to do that?
I think also, interesting enough, there's actually just a purely like Darwinian biological argument against it as well, would be that variation is extremely important in populations. Because if one example would be, say, like the Cavendish, which is the current species of banana. You're going to, if you go to the shop, that's a Cavendish. It's a banana, and that particular genus of banana. They are all more or less genetically identical. And that's why you'll be seeing articles sometimes, occasionally every 5 years, there's an article on how the Cavendish is about to be wiped out or cease to exist. And the reason for that is because you get a population of genetically identical fruit like that, for example, and this has happened before in history. One disease that is really threatening to this, and there's no genetic variation in them, so it just wipes out the entire population. And this is not inconceivable with humans, especially if you have populations that are becoming more and more genetically similar, or having less variation, or having less of these weird random variations in them. And obviously, there's the whole inbreeding problems and all sorts of things like that. But wow,
I think we'll leave that one there.
That's good.
All right, cheers.